At the grave of his only son, a billionaire finds a child crying, his maid's daughter. Her tears carry a secret that will tear open 5 years of silence, guilt, and buried truth. What he discovers will not only break his heart, but change what he believed about love, loss, and redemption forever. Every Sunday, at exactly 9 o'clock, Richard Holden's Rolls-Royce Phantom curved through the gates of Willowstone Memorial Gardens. The engine's hum was soft, respectful, almost mournful. For 5 years, this drive had been a ritual, his quiet pilgrimage to the place where his only son, Michael, lay buried beneath the oak trees. Outside the tinted windows, the city he had built glimmered. His name was on skyscrapers, hospitals, and charities. But inside the car it meant nothing. He stared out, lost, seeing not the skyline, but the ghost of a boy he never really knew. His driver, Thomas, an ex-military man with calm eyes, didn't speak. He knew the rules. On Sundays, silence was sacred. The car stopped near the old path. "I'll wait, sir," Thomas murmured. Richard nodded, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal coat. He stepped out into the cool air, the scent of rain and freshly cut grass filling his lungs. He walked with a measured pace, his cane barely touching the gravel. Michael had been 25, bright, defiant, the kind of son who fought for purpose, not profit. He'd left behind his father's empire to join the Marines, and 5 years ago, he didn't come back. Richard had built him a monument, black granite polished until it reflected the sky. He visited every Sunday, bringing white lilies, Michael's favorite, but this Sunday something was different. As he reached the hill where the headstone stood, his steps slowed. A small figure sat cross-legged on the grass, a child. Her shoulders trembled, her small hand resting on the name engraved in stone. Richard froze. The sight was wrong, intrusive, like someone had stepped into his grief uninvited. The girl couldn't have been more than 10. She wore a pale yellow dress, faded and patched at the knees. Her shoes were muddy, her hair tangled, and she was crying. Quietly, painfully, the kind of cry that doesn't make a sound but breaks the air around it. Richard's chest tightened. For a moment he simply watched. Then, in a voice too sharp for the silence, he said, "Why are you here, child?" The girl flinched as if his voice had struck her. She spun around, her eyes wide and wet. They were the kind of eyes you don't forget. Deep, frightened, but burning with something else. A quiet defiance. Richard saw her mouth open, but no words came out. She simply stared. He took a step forward, softening his tone. "This is a private place." She looked down at the headstone again, her fingers trembling over the carved letters. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to say thank you." "Thank you?" he echoed, puzzled. The girl nodded, clutching something small in her hand, a wooden pendant shaped like a dove. "My mama said he was a good man." "He helped her once," Richard frowned. He didn't remember his son helping anyone outside the military. "Who's your mother?" The girl hesitated. Her lips trembled. "Susan," she said softly. "Susan Miller." The name hit Richard like a faint echo from a long hallway. "Susan, yes." His maid, quiet, always punctual, invisible. She had left suddenly after Michael's funeral, but what would her daughter be doing here? Richard knelt down beside the child, his expensive trousers brushing against the damp grass. "What's your name?" "Lily." The name suited her, fragile but bright. "Lily, why are you crying here?" The girl looked up and the tears came again. "Because I miss him too." Richard's breath caught. "You knew my son?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood abruptly, clutching the wooden dove tight. "I have to go." Before he could react, she ran through the trees, her yellow dress vanishing into the mist. Richard stayed frozen, his heart pounding, Something was terribly off. He turned back to the grave and saw it then. Resting at the base of the headstone was a small white envelope, slightly damp from the grass. His name was written on it in delicate handwriting. He reached down and picked it up. Inside was a folded note, 4 words, words that made his hand tremble. She deserves to know. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. The mansion, all marble, glass, and silence, felt heavier than ever. He sat in his study, the note open on the desk beside a half-empty glass of scotch. The firelight flickered across the framed photos on the wall. Michael in uniform, Michael as a boy, Michael smiling beside a woman Richard never met. He unfolded the letter again, tracing the words as if they'd change. She deserves to know. Who wrote it? Susan? He picked up his phone. Thomas, find out where Susan Miller went after she left here. There was a pause. Of course, sir. Might take a while. It's been years. Then start tonight. He hung up and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He didn't like mysteries. He built his empire on control, on knowing everything before others did. But this felt personal. He picked up the small dove pendant she had dropped at the grave. It was carved roughly by hand, but with care. On the underside, faint initials were scratched. M.H. Michael Holden, his son's initials. Richard's breath caught. His pulse quickened. Why would this girl, his maid's daughter, have something made by Michael? He rose abruptly, walking to the window overlooking the city. The lights shimmered like a sea of glass. All those years he had blamed the world for taking his son. But maybe he'd missed something much closer. He thought of Susan's face, kind but withdrawn. She'd never asked for anything. Always polite, always invisible. Could it be possible? No impossible but the note, the pendant, the tears. As dawn approached, Richard knew sleep was impossible. He stared at his reflection in the window, a powerful man reduced to questions, and somewhere deep inside, an old ache stirred, one that money could never silence. What if his son had kept one last secret from him? By morning, Richard's office hummed like a command center. Files scattered across his desk, employee records, old addresses, security reports. Thomas entered quietly. We found her, sir. Susan Miller. She lives in a small town, Brighton, near the coast. Alive? Yes, sir. Works at a nursing home. Richard stood, his cane tapping once against the marble floor. Prepare the car. The drive took 4 hours. Rain streaked the windows as countryside replaced city. Richard sat in silence, the pendant warm in his hand. When they reached Brighton, it was afternoon. The nursing home was modest. White walls, trimmed hedges, the kind of place that smelled of lavender and disinfectant. A nurse led him down the corridor. Susan Miller? She repeated. She's on break, out in the garden. The garden was quiet, save for the sound of rain dripping from leaves. And there she was, Susan. Her hair had grayed at the edges, her uniform worn but neat. She looked up and froze. Mr. Holden? Richard nodded, removing his hat. It's been a long time. I never thought I'd see you again. Nor I you. They stood for a moment, the years between them hanging in the air. He took a step closer. Your daughter, Lily, she was at my son's grave. Susan's face went pale. Oh, God, she wasn't supposed to... What was she doing there, Susan? Her hands shook as she covered her mouth. She knows something, doesn't she? He pressed. A tear slipped down her cheek. She knows more than I ever wanted her to. Richard's heart thudded. Tell me the truth, Susan. Who is that child to my son? Susan met his eyes, tired, guilty, unguarded. Mr. Holden, she whispered, Lily is Michael's daughter. The world went still. Rain fell harder against the glass. For the first time in years, Richard forgot how to breathe. Richard stood there, his breath shallow. The garden blurred behind the rain. That's impossible, he said quietly. Michael never. Susan's voice trembled. He didn't tell you because he knew you wouldn't approve. He loved her, Mr. Holden, loved us. The word hit him like a blow. Us? She nodded. I was his maid, but before that I was just a woman trying to survive. He saw that. He treated me like I mattered. Richard sank onto the bench beside her, his cane slipping from his hand. Susan continued softly. He promised to tell you. After his last deployment, he never came back. Tears welled in her eyes. I tried to protect Lily. I didn't want her to grow up under your shadow or be another headline in your empire. I wanted her to be free. Richard's voice cracked. You should have told me. She shook her head. Would you have listened? He didn't answer. The truth burned too close. I kept that note, she said, nodding toward his pocket. Michael wrote it before he left. He said if anything happened to him, you'd come one day, and that when you did, I should give you the truth. Richard's throat tightened. She deserves to know. Susan nodded. That's what he meant. He wanted Lily to know her grandfather. The rain stopped, replaced by silence. Richard looked down at his trembling hands. His empire, his billions, all felt meaningless compared to the fragile. Breathing truth sitting across from him, a granddaughter, Michael's child, and he had never known. For the first time in years, the old man wept. The car ride back from Brighton was quiet. Rain streaked across the windows like slow-moving tears. Richard sat motionless, his mind spinning. Michael had a daughter, the words replayed over and over. A granddaughter, hidden from him all these years. And she wasn't some distant abstract memory. She was real, a little girl who cried at a grave because she missed a man who had died before she could even understand loss. Thomas drove silently, glancing through the mirror once in a while, but saying nothing. He had served the Holdens long enough to know when silence was sacred. By the time they reached the estate, night had fallen. The mansion loomed ahead, cold and vast, every chandelier and marble column now a reminder of everything hollow in his life. Richard went straight to his study. He took the small wooden dove from his pocket and set it beside the letter. He stared at both, symbols of love he had never known, of a boy he had misunderstood. He poured a glass of scotch, but his hand trembled. For the first time in years, the drink didn't numb anything. He whispered into the empty room. Michael, why didn't you tell me? The answer, of course, was silence. Richard's eyes fell on a photograph, Michael in his Marine uniform smiling. He'd been so full of fire, of life, and Richard had been too busy teaching him about power, success, and legacy to ever ask what truly made him happy. Now he knew. A woman, a child, a quiet life he'd never approved of. Richard closed his eyes, and for the first time he didn't see an empire or a boardroom. He saw a small girl's face, blue eyes trembling with grief, clutching a wooden dove. The next morning he called Thomas into the study. "Find her," he said. His voice was low, rough with emotion. "Lily, sir?" "Yes," Richard said. "I want to see her." "Properly this time," Thomas hesitated. "And what will you say to her?" Richard's gaze softened. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe the truth. Maybe the apology her father never got. It took 3 days to find her." Susan had kept Lily home from school, afraid, ashamed. She didn't answer the first 2 times Thomas came to the door. But on the third, she relented. When the black car stopped in front of their small cottage, neighbors peeked through curtains. Lily watched from the window, clutching her wooden dove. Susan knelt beside her. "It's him," she whispered. "Your grandfather." Lily's eyes widened. "He looks so sad." Susan nodded. "He's lost, baby. Just like we were once." Richard stepped out of the car, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in a plain grey coat. He looked smaller somehow, not in height, but in pride. When Susan opened the door, he removed his hat, eyes downcast. "Thank you for seeing me." Lily stood behind her mother, half hidden. Richard looked at her, and for a moment the air itself felt heavy. "Hello, Lily," he said softly. She didn't answer. He knelt, the billionaire kneeling on a wooden floor that creaked beneath his weight. "You look like him," he whispered. Her fingers tightened around the dove. "You mean my dad?" Richard nodded, his eyes glistening. "Yes, your dad." There was silence. Just the sound of the old clock ticking in the corner. Lily looked at him, cautious but curious. "Why didn't you ever come see us?" The question pierced like glass. "I didn't know," he said truthfully. "I thought I'd already lost him. I didn't know I had a part of him left." Lily's expression softened, but she didn't move. "I brought you something," he said, pulling a small box from his coat. Inside was a silver chain with a pendant shaped like a bird, just like hers, but polished, shining. "I had this made the day he was born," he whispered. "For when he became a father." Susan gasped softly. "He kept it, didn't he?" Richard nodded. "Now it's hers." He held it out. Lily hesitated, then reached forward, her small fingers brushing his. Something fragile and unspoken passed between them. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. That night, Richard sat in his study again, the silver pendant box now empty. His mind replayed Lily's quiet voice, her cautious eyes, her innocence. He'd left their house that evening feeling something he hadn't felt in decades: purpose. Not business, not control, but a quiet need to make things right. Thomas entered, holding an envelope. "This arrived at the gatehouse, sir." "From Mrs. Miller." Richard frowned, taking it. The handwriting was careful, familiar. He tore it open. Inside was a single folded page and a photograph. The photo was of Michael, standing barefoot on a beach, holding a toddler in his arms. Lily, her hair catching the sun. His son's laughter frozen in time, and below it, a letter, written in Michael's unmistakable handwriting. "Dad, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't make it home. I don't blame you for anything. I just wish you'd met her, Lily. She's the best thing I ever did. She has your eyes, your stubbornness, your need to fix things even when they're already broken. Don't shut her out the way you shut me out. She deserves love, not legacy. I named her Lily because Mom loved those flowers. I thought maybe that way a piece of her could still grow somewhere. If you ever find her, tell her her dad loved her more than life itself. And tell her that you'll watch over her for me. Michael." Richard's tears blurred the ink. His hand shook as he clutched the paper to his chest. He whispered to the dark, "I will, son. I promise I will." Outside the mansion, dawn was breaking. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the morning light. He went to the window, watching the horizon glow. Somewhere out there, a little girl was sleeping, carrying his son's laughter in her dreams. And now he had a reason to wake up again. Weeks passed. Slowly, the mansion began to change. Where silence once ruled, small bursts of laughter began to echo. Lily visited on weekends with Susan. At first she stayed quiet, keeping to corners, shy, careful. But soon she began exploring the hallways, touching everything that once seemed untouchable. She'd trace her fingers along the piano keys in the parlor. "Did Daddy play?" she asked once. Richard smiled faintly. "He tried." I tried not to listen. Her giggle was soft, the first sound of joy that House had heard in years. One afternoon, Richard led her to a locked door at the end of a corridor. This was his room, he said. Inside, everything was as Michael had left it, his books, his medals, his sketches. Lily ran her hands along a framed drawing. "He liked to draw?" "He liked to dream," Richard said. There was a silence, not heavy but warm. She turned and looked at him. "Grandpa?" she said shyly. It was the first time she called him that. The word broke him. He smiled through tears. "Yes, sweetheart. Can I come here sometimes?" "Just to talk to him?" Richard nodded. "You can come any time you want." Later that evening, he asked Thomas to drive them to the cemetery. Lily carried 2 flowers, one white, one yellow. She placed the yellow on the grave. "From me," she whispered. Then she placed the white one beside it. "From you," Richard's throat tightened. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I used to come here every Sunday," he said softly. "But it always felt like the world stopped here. Today it feels like it's moving again." Lily looked up, smiling faintly. "That means Daddy's happy." The old man smiled back. For once, he believed her. It had been months since that first meeting. The Halden mansion, once cold and hollow, now had drawings taped to mirrors, books scattered on the couch, and laughter in its hallways. Richard found himself looking forward to mornings, to the sound of little feet running across marble floors. He started walking without his cane, surprising even himself. Lily filled the silence Michael had left behind, not replacing it, but healing it. One day she asked, "Grandpa, why do people call you a billionaire?" He chuckled. "Because I have more money than sense, apparently. But if you have all that," she said seriously, "why do you look sad sometimes?" He looked at her, so small, yet seeing right through him. "Because I forgot what matters. And what matters?" He smiled softly. "You do." That night he wrote something new into his will, not because of obligation but love. He didn't leave her companies or estates. He left her something more precious, a trust for education, and a letter that began with, "My dearest Lily, I spent most of my life building walls made of gold, but you taught me how to build bridges made of love." When he signed his name, his hands didn't shake. For once, it felt like legacy finally had meaning. He looked at the framed photo of Michael and Lily on the beach and whispered, "She's safe now, son. I did what you asked." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Soft, silent, forgiving. And for the first time since his son's death, Richard Halden smiled without guilt. It was early spring when Richard noticed Lily spending more time in Michael's old room. She'd sit by the window for hours, sketching, humming to herself. One afternoon, he quietly peeked in. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Lily looked up, smiling. "You and Daddy." He stepped closer. The paper showed 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing beside a tree, their hands joined, a dove flying above them. Richard swallowed hard. "That's beautiful," Lily beamed. "It's for the secret room." "The what?" he asked, amused. She pointed to the far wall. "There's a door behind the books. Daddy said it's where he hid his letters. Mummy showed me." Richard's heart thudded. He'd lived in this house for decades, yet he never knew. Together, they moved the heavy bookshelf aside. A small door appeared, barely taller than Lily herself. Inside was a simple wooden box. Lily looked at him. "Can we open it?" He nodded, hands trembling. Inside were photographs, Michael as a boy, drawings, and dozens of envelopes. On each one his son had written, "To Dad, or when you're ready." Richard's breath caught. He opened the first letter. "You always said strength means not crying, but I think strength means saying sorry. Maybe one day we'll both be strong enough." Another read, "If I ever have a daughter, I'll teach her how to love loud, because silence broke us." Richard couldn't read any more. He sank into the chair, tears falling freely. Lily touched his sleeve gently. "It's okay, Grandpa. He still loves you. He just waited for you to find him." He looked at her, this small, wise child, and realized she was right. Michael wasn't gone. He had left pieces of himself hidden everywhere, and Lily had led him to them. The storm came suddenly, wind lashing against the windows, thunder rolling like the roar of time itself. Richard was reading in the study when the power flickered and died. He went to check on Susan and Lily, but Thomas met him halfway. "Sir, there's water coming in through the east wing." They rushed to move things from the lower rooms. Lily followed, clutching her dove. "Stay with your mother," Richard called, but moments later he heard a small cry. Lily had slipped on the wet marble and fallen. He ran faster than his body should have allowed, scooping her up. "You're okay, sweetheart. Grandpa's here." Outside, lightning illuminated the sky, a wild, trembling light. When they reached safety, Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. "You came for me," she whispered. He held her tight, always. That night, when the storm calmed, the three of them sat by candlelight. Lily said softly, "Daddy used to say storms clean the sky so stars can come back." Richard smiled faintly. He was right. Susan looked at him across the flickering light. "You've changed, Richard," he exhaled. "No, Susan, I'm finally becoming who I should have been when he was alive." The room went silent, not heavy, not sad, just peaceful. Outside, the rain slowed, and when the clouds parted, the first stars blinked through. Lily pointed. "Look, Grandpa, Daddy's star." He looked up too, and for once the world didn't feel empty. Months passed. One morning, the newspapers ran a story that surprised the city. Billionaire Holden launches foundation for orphaned children. When reporters asked why, Richard said quietly, "Because every child deserves to be found before it's too late." The Michael Holden Foundation became his new purpose. He visited schools, hospitals, shelters, places he'd never seen before. Everywhere he went, Lily was beside him, handing out books, hugging children, smiling the way her father once did. She had become his shadow, or maybe he had become hers. At night, they'd sit on the balcony together. "Grandpa," she said one evening, "are you happy now?" He looked at her, the wind playing with her hair, her eyes bright in the moonlight. "I am," he said. "Because you reminded me what happiness looks like." Lily smiled. "It looks like family," he nodded. "Exactly." And in that moment under the quiet sky, he realized something profound. All the money in the world couldn't buy the peace that came from a child's forgiveness. The mansion was no longer a house of ghosts. It was home again. Time moved gently after that. Richard grew older, slower, but softer too. The sharpness that once defined him had been replaced by something calm, the quiet dignity of a man who had finally forgiven himself. One evening, as the sun sank over the hills, he sat with Lily in the garden. Surrounded by blooming lilies, the flowers her father had loved, he held her hand. "Lily, there's something I need you to promise me." She looked up. "Anything, Grandpa. When I'm gone, don't let this place become silent again. Fill it with laughter, music, children. Promise me that." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I promise," he smiled. "Good girl." A few days later he passed away peacefully in his sleep, a faint smile still on his face. At the funeral, Lily placed the wooden dove on his coffin. "Now you can fly with Daddy," she whispered. The crowd wept, but she stood tall, strong, her small hand holding the silver pendant he'd given her years before. And in that quiet moment, as the sun broke through the clouds, a single dove flew overhead. Susan gasped. "Look," Lily smiled through her tears. He kept his promise. Years later, the mansion had become a bright, bustling home for children. Laughter echoing through the halls, where once there had only been grief. A plaque near the entrance read, "The Michael Holden Foundation. Built from love, not regret." Lily, now grown, walked through the halls, carrying her daughter in her arms. She paused by her grandfather's portrait. "See him?" she whispered to her little girl. "That's the man who taught me love can come late, but it still saves you." The child reached out, touching the frame. Grandpa? Lily smiled. Yes, baby, Grandpa, outside in the garden. White lilies bloomed endlessly, the kind her father had loved, the kind her grandfather had planted before he died. The wind carried their scent across the field, and in that quiet fragrance, it almost felt like both men were still there, one watching, one waiting, both proud, because some legacies aren't written in money or marble, they're written in hearts, and Richard Holden's heart, once cold and closed, had finally learned to bloom, and that is how a man who once owned everything realized he had nothing until he met a little girl who carried his son's soul. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, to subscribe, and tell us where in the world you're watching from, because somewhere, someone might just need this story to remember it's never too late to love again.